Hello, friends. Today we'll be talking about the ingress of Mars into the sign of Scorpio. In this video specifically, I'm just going to be talking about displacement, but I will come back mid-month of October to make another video about Mars in Scorpio in regards to its transits, because it's going to be happening in the second half of October. In the first half, we don't have a lot of activity, so I'm just going to really get to the core of what Mars in Scorpio means. So this video will apply if you have this placement in your birth charts, or if you're simply just trying to understand the quality of this upcoming transit. This video will give you a foundation. And I always like to tell you guys what these placements, what each symbol means, because it's important to understand that and just not listen to someone who's trying to predict your life. As a matter of fact, you should know this. If someone doesn't have your personal birth chart in front of them, yes, they can tell you about the mundane astrology, what the feel of the moment and the feel of the day is, but how it will transpire in your life, you need to have good foundation and understanding to be able to decipher that. So when I do videos like this and I get into the nitty-gritties of what is Mars, what is Scorpio, what does it mean together, you actually need that foundation to cast your gaze on your own chart and to understand what's happening. So let's get into the symbolic meaning of Mars in the sign of Scorpio, where Mars ingresses into Scorpio on September 22nd, and it will stay there until November 4th. And as I said, on the 15th, it starts to make very strong aspects, and that sign and that placement become very active. I'll come back for that transit video, so keep an eye out. If you want, subscribe, so then you get the notification and you can watch that video. But let's begin with Mars itself. The first thing to remember about Mars, it represents the masculine principle. Its element is fire, and it's about the raw expenditure of energy. That's why it's related to initiation, ignition, igniting things. And it's also the impulse to move forward and to act. So every time that we're doing some sort of an action, we're talking about the function of Mars within us, that Martian will within us that initiates and acts. And Mars has so much velocity, force, and power in its forward propulsion that it will pierce through anything, break through anything that's standing in front of it. So we're talking about that sheer willpower. So we can see how Mars also represents strength. Our muscles are represented by Mars, as well as our sense of bravery and discipline. Saturn can represent discipline too, but is a discipline of negation. Mars is a discipline of action. So these are some of the good significations of Mars, but like all planets, they also have these significations that can start to go to the other side of the spectrum. And Mars is a malefic. So if we don't have mastery over that Martian will within us, it will show those negative aspects, which includes violence, anger, being argumentative, especially if we have some sort of a Mercury activity going on, which will be the case later on in the month when Mercury and Mars will make a conjunction. And Mars can also represent war, severing, cutting. It also signifies competition and sports. And I talked about this competitive aspect of Mars, how Mars is also a social planet in some ways, but it requires opposition. So what better field than sports, let's say, to have a competitor and opposition to be able to practice that Martian will. And institutions like police and military, places where energy and force need to be directed are represented by Mars. So now let's take a minute to see what Scorpio is about. So the first thing to remember that Scorpio is the feminine sign of Mars. Aries is the masculine. Scorpio is of the feminine principle, and it's a fixed water sign. And when we say something's of the feminine principle or is of the water element, we're talking about its nature being receptive. But in the sign of Scorpio, this is not a soft receptivity like the way you would get in Cancer. It's not yielding like the way you would get it in Pisces. Scorpio receives by taking in and then penetrating inwards. That's the kind of way you can imagine what the Scorpio receptivity is doing. Its energy is about persistence. It's defiance. It has a lot of intensity. It's Mars' sign. We have to remember that. And it doesn't let go once when it fixates on something because it's a fixed sign. Another thing about Scorpio, it represents passion and defiance that runs very deep. It also has a very independent, it's a water sign, so it's going to be related to emotions, but it's also related to Mars, which is about independence and individuality. It has independent emotions. It's unyielding. Scorpio people will not give a damn what you think about them. When they feel something, they don't care what your feeling is. They have that independence of emotions, and they can be very defiant to other people's expectations. Scorpio is also synonymous with a sign that's very secretive because it's got that depth, that penetrative thing that goes to the bottom where the light cannot shine there anymore. So things are in the dark. So it can be mysterious, it can be spiritual. And when you think about depth of things, you think about mysteries, you can think of our internal self, like the deepest part of our psyche. It's constantly transmuting and transforming things. So Scorpio can represent the symbolic journey of transmutation. And when you read a lot of ancient texts, yes, the symbol of Scorpio is a scorpion, which is its lowest form, its basic form. It can transmute itself from that scorpion form to an eagle. And at its highest point, its symbolic representation is a phoenix. And if you think about what does the scorpion represent, it is the struggle, is the core struggle for maintaining life, for remaining alive. It's the struggle for survival, like that exoskeleton that is protecting that soft interior, the scorpion. It's vigilant, it's hypervigilant with its stinger up and just ready to either sting you or even to sting itself. It's fighting for life, defiantly fighting for life, this little insect. And then why would its transmutation suddenly be an eagle, like you go from an insect to a bird? We're talking about a higher vision, top down, not from the bottom, crawling on the ground and trying to survive. Eagle is a great predator too, but it's coming from the above downwards to grab upwards. So it's about vision of thriving. When you learn how to do life in Scorpio, you go from survival to thriving, which is that eagle symbolism. And ultimately, the phoenix is representing shedding the form, the transmutation and the transformation of this stage to the next stage of evolution, which also comes from the sign of Scorpio. And this is actually one aspect of Scorpio that is related to the 8th house as a natural zodiac. They have this in common because the life force actually belongs in the 8th house. So let's say you have in the natural zodiac, you bring Scorpio into the 8th house, you get this transmutive component, this mysterious aspect of Scorpio mixed with the 8th house life force, you get transformation. Life and death become a very common theme suddenly. But now with all of that said, we got even a little bit abstract. I usually try to just keep the videos down to the symbols and the core so it's decipherable. But let's now just move Mars into the sign of Scorpio. And when we talk about the world of symbols, it's actually good to get metaphorical, just to start to draw some imagery in the mind. So we can ask ourselves, what happens when Mars, the great god of war, the planet of energy, motion, forward propulsion, takes residence in this sign that just takes whatever that it receives, that receptivity of it to its depth of it? What happens here? First thing that we have to remember before anything else, Mars is in its own domicile. It is in its own sign. It is the ruler of Scorpio. Super important. That means Mars has dignity here. But this is a very different Mars in Aries than it is in Scorpio. Because Aries Mars is very much outwards. It's like in one of the previous videos I did, I demonstrated with a matchbox. You take a match into the matchbox and doof, it ignites right away. So it's about visibility. That fire of Mars in the sign of Aries is very visible. It's bold, is direct, is rushing forward. But Scorpio, Mars in Scorpio, it becomes inwards. It's in its hidden mode. It's in a water sign. So it's going to become deep, intense, and strategic. And in both signs, Mars is dignified because it is in its own signs, so it doesn't need to ask for permission to do anything. It can operate in its own full glory. So what Scorpio is going to do, it's going to support Mars's strength, Mars's bravery, Mars's individualism, and it allows Mars to consistently be itself in these ways. And we might naturally think, okay, Mars is definitely going to get extinguished in a water sign. Why is Mars working in a water sign? But one way to think about Scorpio's water fuses into pressure. It creates steam. So it's a kind of energy that doesn't burn on the surface. It doesn't need to ignite. It's pressurized something from the inside, like a pressure cooker. It moves inwards and it has the ability to create enormous and tremendous amount of focus, for example. And it just keeps building on this because it's creating an internal pressure. that transformation and transmutation is also coming from this internal processing of Scorpio when Mars is there. Like Mars in Scorpio is not the soldier that's marching through a battlefield. It would in Aries, but not in Scorpio. It's the fighter who waits in the trenches, who's thinking, who's very focused, like sniper sitting there strategizing. And Mars in Scorpio can become super relentless because of that fixed nature that's in the sign. And it's also because of that fixed nature, it can also show a lot of restraint until that very precise moment when that bullet needs to be released. Like a sniper, very, very precise, accurate, keep the breath, hold, target, shoot. And as I was mentioning earlier, it's also like a pressure cooker. So it's heating up, heating up. Scorpio, Mars and Scorpio people have this quality from the outside, you don't know, but the pressure is building on the inside and then it's building because it's heating up. And you have to learn, if you're with a Mars and Scorpio person, how do I release that valve and let off some steam for them? Because otherwise that pot will explode. And we're talking about Mars here, right? That's what I was saying earlier, war and things of that nature, violence. You can have that kind of an explosion in the sign of Scorpio. We can also use the analogy of a volcano with Mars in Scorpio. There's subterranean activity. We're talking about the molten rocks, right? They're being melted. It's being pressurized inside the volcano. And eventually it's going to come to that undoable eruption. Something to keep in mind for the transits, especially when Mars and Mercury make that conjunction. And Mercury represents communication. So eruption of communication in that way can be very common, but we'll get into that in the next video. And we can take this into the realm of our psychology. So in psychological terms, we're talking about the intensity of one's willpower with Mars in Scorpio. For instance, everything in Scorpio, at the bottom of it has to do with this notion of defiance and independence. For example, Scorpio represents defiant passion, not just passion. It doesn't just represent independence or emotion. It's emotional independence. It's about independent opinions. So we can see that the sign of Scorpio uses emotions to create the intensity and the focus that it needs. This is why Scorpios are very good at stirring emotions in other people and getting them all ramped up, or they can have that feeling within themselves. Like I've said this in one of the other videos, heavy Scorpio people have shifty eyes. It's like when you look, there's like, it's like the eyeball is kind of vibrating. I can't even describe it. And that's because it's always pressurized on the inside. There's so much energy built up on the inside. And because of that, it's very hard to just externally and superficially move Scorpio people, especially when Mars is there. It's like a defiant passion that refuses to be moved by superficial distraction, to have an enormous amount of focus. And if you have this placement or people who have this placement, their anger is very different than other people's anger. Like in Aries, I have my moon in Aries. I will like a burst of anger, like ignite it. And then just like that match that ignites, like, and then there's just like a little fire and then it goes out. But not with Scorpio people. And anger doesn't explode instantly like the way it does in Aries. With Mars here, that anger can simmer and it's all under the surface. Again, it's subterranean. You can't see it. You won't know it. It's just held so tightly within and then it erupts. But one thing about its eruption is not chaotic either. It has a sense of precision and focus. Again, like that sniper, like when they're angry at you and when it erupts, it's unmistakable and it's coming at you precisely. And then going back to that fixed nature, that defiant nature that's in the sign of Scorpio. When we have Mars here, it can give someone the strength and the courage, the bravery to hold their ground no matter what. There's a refusal to surrender or to give up when something matters to them. But the thing is, on the flip side of the same coin, Mars and Scorpio people can develop fixations. Like they might like someone, it's time to let go. Like the other person's not showing interest, they will fight for it. They'll just continuously be there. And if you really dig deep into the psychology, it's a battle of control. And the funny thing is they don't express their fixations in a pleasant way. There's always a sense of harshness to it. when you dig deep even to their statement, there's a sense of them and their sense of control being threatened. And the way they project those words is kind of threatening to the external world too. Mars and Scorpio people, you need some good psychological understanding to understand what's happening in front stage and the backstage and how the backstage is informing the front stage. It's a complex sign. It's very much psychological because of that watery nature of the sign. Another way to think of Mars in Scorpio is to think of discipline of Mars being fused with the depth of Scorpio. So the sign can create extraordinary persistence. As a matter of fact, when I was doing some research in the past about Scorpio placements in general, Moon in Scorpio, oddly enough, moon that is debilitated. I talk about that in another video, moon's debilitation. And Mars in Scorpio can make very successful human beings because of this persistence that's there, because of that fixed nature and that defiant thing that it's in the sign of Scorpio. And Mars just being so initiative, that discipline that can come in. In a lot of ways, they're long distance fighters. They can endure the storm, the pressure, the internal pressure that would just make other people collapse and implode on themselves. They can hold that and keep moving forward. And that defiance that's in the sign of Scorpio, they refuse to tap out. They refuse to submit, to let it go, and to give up. And they also have the capacity to keep digging deeper and deeper. Sometimes that means digging deeper into our own internal strength, right? So when you put Mars here, it gives you the strength to just keep digging to the core and the bottom of your soul to pull up more strength, more resiliency, more persistence. So Mars and Scorpio can become relentless. And that fixation is coming into place too, right? I will not give up. It's like the depth, blinders on, going in, penetrating to the depth of something. And I do want to touch on this, the fact that Scorpio does represent secrecy, because everything in the sign is on the bottom. The depth of things is subterranean. So the ambition that comes with Mars when it's in the sign of Scorpio is also subterranean. A lot of times you do not know the intent of Scorpion people and what their goals are. They're one of those people that will keep it in a secret, will keep it in the dark until it's done. And then when something is done, they'll tell you like, yeah, I did that. And you're like, what the hell? Like, it was years of work, years of persistence. They were like going at it, working towards it without anyone knowing. That's a benign part of it. It also works behind the scenes. It's like the puppeteer controlling the puppets in the front of the stage. But there is someone on the backstage doing the puppeteering. It plans, it strategizes, and it plots his way to the finish line. And all the words that I just used, they can be taken to the negative components of it too. And I want to mention this point too, which is a psychological one again, which has to do with Mars's nature of being independent and the sign of Scorpio also having a sense of independence in it. That's defiant. And especially when you put Mars in Scorpio, it becomes so independent that it doesn't want to rely on other people. It wants to rely on its own passions, on its own emotions, on its own opinions, and it wants to push through. So it becomes very defiant. If you're going to help a Mars in Scorpio person, you better be helping them the way they want to be helped. It's not the way you want to help them. They're headstrong, they're self-contained, and they can either have this standoffish thing externally, even though it's Mars and you would think it's just like wants to propel forward and it's going to make itself known, not in the sign of Scorpio. It does have this thing of containment within, held within strongly. So in general, I don't know, Mars and Scorpio, you want to dig within, you want to find out what you're made of, which this transit will show us. And, we're coming out of that post-eclipse, which was very much about showing us the reality of our life. Snap back into reality of the practical things that you have to do in life in order to get through. That's what that eclipse was very much about. And now that we've seen reality, and it's kind of funny how for the first 15 days, there aren't that many activities. We're talking about Mars purely in the sign of Scorpio. And it's almost as if it's asking us, how deep can you dig? How far within can you go and reach to your inner strength to understand how to do your life right now? What are you willing to fight for? How strong are you? How courageous are you? To be able to defiantly stand up and say, this is my life. This is how I'm going to do it. And Mercury Kazemi will come, the second one, but I'll talk about that in the next video. Next thing you know, this video is going to be like 2 hours long. But I do want to mention this before wrapping everything up as a side note. And I'm not that much into tarot, but from all the readings that I've done, Scorpio and the death card in tarot are connected. And death here is not, in the eighth house too, it doesn't have to mean something literal. It can be symbolic, but it is talking about endings, transformation, and the will to push through the life cycles, which is a constant loss and renewal. And Mars in Scorpio has this innate understanding. I was talking about the scorpion, the eagle, and the phoenix earlier too, right? So Mars in Scorpio, as the ruler of Scorpio, has this innate understanding of death as the life cycle of life. And I'm kind of glad that right after that eclipse, we get Mars ingress into the sign of Scorpio. That fuel to be able to dig deeper and deeper, to let go of the previous, how we used to do things, what we thought we couldn't do. Now we're figuring out how to do it. And Mars has a lot to do with cutting and severing, ending life as a malefic. I've said this in other videos. People think Saturn is bad. No, Mars is that instant accident where you die and it severs you and your life force from this life. It kills you instantly. That's what it represents. But in the sign of Scorpio, with that defiance that is there, with that tenacity that's in the sign, the ability to also let go becomes one's power sometimes. It's a powerful act of survival. In fact, we could say that when Mars comes into the sign of Scorpio, we get that higher octave of Scorpio, which represents the phoenix. It's the firebird that has to burn itself, or the things around it to be reborn. So this transit has very much to do with this. And if you have in your birth chart, this is part of your ongoing life process, this kind of a cycle. And another level, on the deepest level, we can say Mars in Scorpio represents the will. It's the will to penetrate life's mysteries. And life is mysterious. Every aspect of it is mysterious. I don't care what school of thought, what theoretical background you come to. It's very hard to get to the bottom of it. And when you have Mars in Scorpio, it has the tenacity and the audacity to keep digging, to try to understand. And it also has the ability with Mars in Scorpio to endure the harshness of life. And what that's going to indicate in your chart, if you have Mars in Scorpio, if it's saying you have the endurance for harshness, that means there will be harshness in life that you need to endure. And that's okay, because that is part of your life cycle of becoming a higher version of your previous form or state of being, from the scorpion to the eagle to the phoenix. It's about emerging and transforming over and over. This is the power of Mars in Scorpio. It's also talking about ambition being fused with defiance, which is dangerous if you think about it, dangerous in a beautiful way. It's about passion being fused with intensity and strength with emotional depth. And because Mars is dignified here, it has the resources that it needs to do all of these things effectively. That's why I'm saying if you have this placement and you have been experiencing life's hardness and harshness, which is the nature of Mars, you have the resources to overcome, to transmute, and to transform. And when Mars enters Scorpio by transit, as we're going through it right now, we're collectively stepping into this mode of being. Our energy is becoming a little bit sharper. We're becoming more focused, more intense, more defiant, more independent. And it's almost as if the superficial cannot satisfy us anymore. It's like, nah, I can't ricochet off these surfaces. I need to go to the depth of things and to understand things. So we're being called to act with persistence, to dig a little bit deeper and to face our hidden truth, come face to face with them and to meet them, to see them, to grapple with them, to feel the pressure of it. And hopefully we can come out of the other end of it in Sagittarius, having made the right choices, especially after the eclipses again. Now we are aligned to what our soul is meant to be aligned to, so that we have our higher calling, higher purpose in Sagittarius, which will be on November 4th. So if you have this in your birth chart, your entire lifetime is not about casual actions. And during this transit, this is not a time for casual actions. Oh, let me just go about things as the way I have always proceeded. The thing is, we're talking about a malefic that it is dignified. It is in its own sign, but it is a malefic. When we are not aligned, we are tormented by malefics. This is really the time for depth and for the type of internal motion that can be transformative. You know, when I think about Scorpio, what I think about is very much like the samurai code. You would think Mars and Aries would give you the samurai code, but it comes from Scorpio, which is to live and to die with honor. That should be Scorpio's motto, because when Scorpio wants to become dishonorable, it's quite dishonorable. But if you can get mastery over the sign and this planet Mars in the sign, you have a true samurai. And you know, one of the lessons in Scorpio is don't just fight just to persist on fighting, because that's what Mars is about. Mars wants to fight. Mars needs an opposition. We have to ask ourselves why. And during this transit too, we have to ask, what is the truth beneath my struggles? What is the story, this narrative of power and willpower that you're trying to write? We all need to ask this. And in conclusion, we can say Mars in Scorpio is teaching us a kind of an endurance, tenacity, resiliency, relentlessness, as well as an independence. All of it, which is ultimately about transformation of some kind. And for all of us, they're going to show in different sphere of our life, because the sign of Scorpio is sitting in a particular house because we have a particular ascendant. So if you're an Aries ascendant, we're talking about your 8th house themes. If you're a Taurus ascendant, we're talking about 7th house themes. So this is something to pay attention to understand which themes, what kind of people are going to come and conspire in this narrative of your life in this moment. These are important factors to keep into consideration, as well as the rest of the configuration of your charts. Like in your own chart, where is Mars sitting? Because Scorpio is there. Well, is Mars in Scorpio or is Mars somewhere else? These are the nuances that you have to take into consideration to understand what this transit means for you. And if you have Mars in Scorpio, it becomes a little bit more straightforward to take the content of this video and to apply it directly and just go hypercubed, because you have Mars there. Now you have transiting Mars there too. And as always, if you like the content of this video, please do like, subscribe, and comment. You guys know I love your comment. And by your participation, it's allowing me to grow this channel, which then it will permit me to make more content like this. And thank you. I want to say this actually. Thank you for those of you who do leave a comment. I'm shocked in terms of some of the interactions that are building up. It's so lovely to speak with you guys, and I'm very appreciative of that. It's lovely for me to have this interaction, because it just doesn't feel like I'm stuck in this room. I'm making these videos and that's it, you know? Thank you for that. And all I'm going to say right now is that may we find trust in the unseen, courage in vulnerability, and the freedom that comes from knowing that we can rise again, because transformation is not a choice. It is the truth of life itself. Scorpio is a life lesson. And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.